Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by the dynamic Joe Fordyce. Joe, the 2024-25 season is here. The Flyers kick things off Friday night in Vancouver against the Canucks. So we're going to get into three storylines for this season. And I think it's safe to say the big one is Matvei Michkov and Jett Luchanko, Joe, the two kids. How do they change the Flyers up front? How do you think they will push the Flyers? And can Luchanko stick here as well?
Well, I think to the viewer and the fan, this is going to be the moment where the rebuild kind of arrives. The part of the rebuild that pushes it forward, because you're going to see an 18 and a 19-year-old in the starting lineup on opening night, and that is, I mean, John Tortorella said the other day it's a young league. But I'm not necessarily sure people around here are used to it being that young for their team. And now it is. Now it's not, you're not talking about, hey, this team has Macklin Celebrini or this team has Connor Bedard or things like that. You have some of those guys now to talk about, or at least one of them. And then you have a first-round pick who played his way onto the roster, which nobody expected. And I mean, to me, if you're a fan looking for this team to get back to where they once were, and you see those two kids on the ice, I don't know how you can't help but be excited about that.
I agree. I think, if anything, it brings an element of excitement. Luchanko brings an exciting element of speed, an area I think the Flyers have lacked. And Michkov, of course, is arguably their most dynamic player that we've seen in quite some time. So, if anything, I think it absolutely makes them more entertaining and worth watching. With Luchanko, I think the Flyers obviously have that 9-game audition to work with. They can send him back to junior hockey in Guelph, his OHL team, by that mark and not burn the first year of his ELC. Or he could impress Joe to the point where he sticks. I think the Flyers are open to both. They're going to play it game by game. And I think it really will come down to the eye test. If he looks like he belongs and he's helping them in all areas, penalty kill, power play, and even strength, they'll keep him. But if he looks overwhelmed and looks like this is just a little too much, they'll have no problem sending him back. With Michkov, Joe, do you think there's going to be some patience here he had such a good preseason? I think he even exceeded the expectations of the Flyers, the people that make the decisions and know him best. If he gets off to a slower start or has some lumps here and there, will people be patient?
I think people will be patient because, I mean, this is a lot of stuff all at once for him over the last couple of months. And two, there has to be a feeling out process, because a winger doesn't necessarily succeed on their own. They need, they have to figure out what center plays best with him. And it's one thing to do it in the preseason and practice, but it's another to play NHL games against guys that, other teams that they don't care what the chemistry of your team is. And they're just looking to win every night. So, when you get that first taste of the games count competitiveness, which he hasn't had yet, I think there has to be some patience. But I don't think people are gonna say, oh, why doesn't this 19-year-old have 5 goals already or something like that? Because one, he's 19. And I'm pretty sure that the John Tortorella, as he did during this camp and preseason, is going to remind everybody he's 19 as many times as he can. Mm-hmm. And, it's going to be a feeling out process. And then, because you can practice all you want with the center and know their tendencies in practice and even to an extent in the preseason, but once you get out there and you have other teams scheming against you, that's a whole different ball game. And I think it's a whole different ball game for a guy who's 19 and he is not. I mean, he's not up to speed on NHL speed yet. The speed of the game, the physical nature of the game. So I think everybody needs to have patience. But that said, I don't think, based on what I saw in the preseason, I really don't think there's going to be that much of a learning curve for him. I think I'm not going to say he's a one-trick pony. That's not what I mean. But the skill set that he has, I feel like it's translatable to any hockey. Go to the net, score. And he's got the speed, he's got the shot, he's got all the things that make that happen. And I think that's translatable to any level.
His well-roundedness really stood out in the preseason. I think everyone knew that this kid was talented and immensely skilled, but it was the other things where he could protect the puck along the boards. He could keep plays alive. He found the hard areas of the ice and had no problem going there. That's why he's dynamic, is because he does everything. He does it all. And I agree. I think expectations have gone up. Somehow he has raised expectations for himself because he was so good in the preseason. He scored in every single game, 7 points, 4 games. He was great on home ice. So fans saw it for the first time and they enjoyed it. So expectations, I think, are going to be par for the course. People are going to want a lot, and they're going to want to see a lot. But I think everyone's going to understand if he goes scoreless one game or if he fights it a little bit, that yes, this kid is 19. The future is still bright, and I think
I think there'll be plenty of games where he goes scoreless too. I mean,
yeah,
let's just I'm trying to remember back to Connor McDavid's season, but I know that his rookie season got interrupted because he actually got hurt against the Flyers when Brandon Manning checked him. So, and Bedard got hurt last year too, and he got hurt as a result of something that young players do. So I think there is that aspect to Michkov that he needs to learn that not skating with your head down and the things that there's some things that are without the puck that don't involve scoring that are different about this league. And skating with your head down is one of those things where that could lead to some really bad things, especially because he's not the tallest guy. So, I that kind of stuff is a feeling out process. And that's where we have to give the kid some time. And it's not, we're dealing with it. We're coming from a team that John Tortorella over and over and over told us again, they were struggling to make plays, struggling to finish, struggling to score goals. And now it's like, well, I mean, the thought process is, well, he's here, he scores goals, the problem's solved. It may not be. We don't know. But that full weight of that cannot be put on a 19-year-old. But like I said, I do think, based on watching him in the preseason, his instincts are pass the puck, get to the scoring areas, have your stick on the ice, that all those things that, like I said, translate to any level of hockey. Those things are there. So I do expect him. I don't expect it to be that long of a. We won't have to have that much patience with the kid, is what I'll say.
and he's a gamer, and I think that's going to help him because not succeeding really bothers him. I think it makes him better. Being tired, I think, makes him better. Like, he finds another gear, another level when some adversity hits. That's what I've noticed with him. That's what I've heard about him. So I think that will help playing in Philadelphia, playing his first year in the NHL at 19 years old. Those qualities, those intangibles, I think should help. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on Open Table.
Jordan, I will say, I have one more thing to say about this with Michkov. I do think it's while a lot of people are not exactly thrilled that the team's buried on the West Coast for 4 games, I don't think that's the worst thing for Michkov.
Yep.
You get 4 games under your belt, 2 of them against really good teams, 2 of them against teams that, I mean, Calgary's probably not going to be very good, and I don't know what to think of Seattle now that they've gone under a coaching change and all that sort of stuff. So, but I think he's on the road, the bonding experience that is for a long road trip to start the season. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world for a kid who has, I mean, seemingly the weight of a franchise on his shoulders. So when he comes back here for the home opener against Vancouver, there's tape on him, let's say already. Fans will have seen some things. So it's not as if everybody's completely unfamiliar with his game. There'll be 4 games. One of them's on national TV. I mean, there'll be a lot of looks at this kid before he steps on the Wells Fargo Center ice, and it counts.
For those listening, the Flyers, and if you're not familiar, the Flyers have 4 straight road games to open this season, all at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So some late night puck drops, and the Flyers don't come home to the Wells Fargo Center until October 19th, when they'll face the Canucks again, this time in the Flyers home opener. Joe, I do think John Tortorella appreciates the road trip because it kind of yanks his players away from Philly, kind of pushes them all together, forces them to bond even more, and it probably helps his younger players get a taste of a few environments on the road and what it's like to play in big buildings in the NHL, to the point where, yeah, I think it will really help them come the home opener. A big storyline, Joe, is the defensive picture. How will things shake out defensively for the Flyers? Can they help their goaltenders more? And can they make up for, obviously, the loss of Sean Walker? Can Rasmus Ristolainen stay healthy? Can Jamie Drysdale stay healthy? A lot of questions, I think, across the board that the Flyers eventually are going to need answers. How do you see the defensive picture holding up?
Well, I think it's all going to come down to 2 things: Jamie Drysdale's health and Ristolainen's health, because I'm not sure. Erik Johnson is not here to play every game. So right now it looks like he's the extra defenseman, but it certainly seems like that third pair is going to be toggling back and forth between, certain guys. So, and really I'm interested to see, Ristolainen was out the whole season last year. So how does he fit back into the picture? I think is a big thing, because everything the Flyers accomplished last year came without him. So we talked about it on this podcast, how it's a difficult proposition to take a guy that, and it's not like he's not like a blend-in player. He's a player that comes in and immediately has a physical presence, and kind of, you always know he's there. And so I'm interested to see how that works, how much Erik Johnson will play. But in terms of the top 4, I think Jamie Drysdale's health makes all the difference in the world, because he's going to be playing on the power play. We know he's a dynamic player. We saw it last year, and then he got hurt. And that's kind of been the story of his whole career. So I think a couple of podcasts ago, or maybe it was the last one, we talked about how Drysdale himself said it, like, this is really frustrating to have this be the cloud that hangs over your game. You're a dynamic player, but you're an integral part of this team, one of the top 4 defensemen, but it's always, there's always a sort of caveat that, what if he gets hurt? When is he going to get hurt? So it seems weird to say it comes down to 1 second pair defenseman, but I really think Drysdale's health makes everything else fall in line with what they want for that defensive core.
Absolutely. And we saw how dynamic he looked in training camp. In the preseason, he looks healthy. He had the core muscle surgery. He also battled a shoulder injury last year. So he's been banged up. And I think he's just so relieved to be healthy and give himself an actual chance, a fighting chance to show people why he was drafted in the first round, why he's been touted. And I think the big thing he'll have to answer is defensively. If he doesn't always have that puck on his stick and they're not living in the offensive zone, can he hold up defensively where John Tortorella and Bradshaw, they can trust Sealer and him late in games and not have to really, really rely on nothing but Sanheim and York? Can they spell those guys late in games when it gets the puck gets in the defensive zone? Can they hold up there? I think will be very important. And Joe, with Ristolainen, I think him being healthy is huge for the Flyers and also huge for their chances maybe around the trade deadline, depending on where the team is. Could they look to maybe move him? We saw it with Sean Walker last year. Perhaps Ristolainen could be a candidate to be moved, depending on where the team is. I'm not trading him yet. He hasn't played a game yet this season, but the Flyers have raved about him in camp. He can be very effective, and he plays a playoff style. The Flyers aren't in playoff position, or if they're not thinking playoffs, perhaps they get a playoff team knocking on the door and seeing what it would take to get Ristolainen.
Yeah, well, a couple things too with that. He hasn't played in the playoffs, so that would be a major motivating factor for him. And secondly, he is a veteran defenseman that brings a physical presence to the ice. And teams that think they're in the mix for the Stanley Cup love those kind of players. A guy that brings a physical tone to the ice. And we heard the talk. We've heard the talk a couple of years now about that. The problem is he hasn't been healthy. So, health combined with his contract coming closer to the end makes him an ideal candidate for a trade. But as you said, you don't want to have traded him yet. You want to see what he does, because maybe the Flyers are in playoff contention and he's a valuable player for them. I mean, we saw them use him in all different kinds of ways 2 seasons ago, and including the power play, which was very different. Also, he toned down the discipline. He remained physical without the penalties at the end of 2 seasons ago down the stretch, which I think makes him a infinitely more valuable player if he can be physical without the penalties. And because that's really what teams are looking for. You don't want a guy that's going to be in the penalty box and leaving your team shorthanded all the time. So,
and I think he's come a long way under Bradshaw and John Tortorella. A lot smarter in the way he plays with his physicality, a lot smarter in the way he hits. Doesn't always go looking for that big hit. He goes for the effective hit, which has been huge. And he played top pair minutes in Buffalo. He's been a second or first pair defenseman his entire career. Right now, he's on the third pair here in Philadelphia. So I think if he's healthy and he's playing well, that gives the Flyers a lot of depth, a lot of good depth at an important position, which I think could be huge. And Joe, probably the biggest position, the most important position in the game, is arguably the Flyers' biggest question going into the season: goaltending. Samuel Ersson entering his first full season as a number one, and Ivan Fedotov, a guy with one career start, is the team's backup. Where do you think things go here in net, and do you have faith in Samuel Ersson being the guy for the Flyers?
I have faith in Samuel Ersson because he's shown us some good things, and he talks like a guy. I mean, he said flat out to us on media day that he still has a lot to prove. And the question asked was, do you feel like a starting goaltender? You like the humbleness of a guy that says, well, this is my first season going in as a goalie. I still have stuff, I have a lot to prove. And he seemed like he had a great offseason, motivated to come in as the number one guy. My issue is not with Ersson. My issue is whatever the picture looks like behind him. Because, as you mentioned, Fedotov, one career start. And some of what we saw was not NHL level last year. and then I'm not sure what. So I really think this goaltending picture is cloudy looking. And, we talked about this a few podcasts ago about that this is hands down the biggest question mark. Because one, Ersson has never been entered a season as the starting goalie. He's never been asked to, hey, you're going to play 65 games, and 65 may be aiming a little high, but and then how many games are you asking Fedotov to play? And I don't know, injuries happen, things happen. So what becomes if that happens? Who comes up? And I think it's a very flimsy is the word the best word, because I don't see much depth there. And the guy that's the starter is entering his first year, and the last thing I think you want is to not have a solid backup. And I don't think we know what Fedotov is right now.
I agree that would be my biggest concern. It's not so much Samuel Ersson. I think we have last year to work off of. I think we had the prior year to work off of when he came up and helped the Flyers win games. We can work off of what we saw with him and project a little bit here. With Fedotov, we simply just do not know. He has made one career start. He turns 28 in November, and it's just really tough to tell if he's going to be a real good quality NHL goaltender or if he can't crack it at this level. I don't want to write him off by any means. I'm not going to judge him too harshly on a start and 3 appearances last year when it was such a whirlwind when he came over and he was just jumping into things. I thought he was okay in the preseason. I thought there was really good moments for him where he used his size effectively to pretty much take up the entire net and not let guys beat him. But we just don't know yet. I need to see it, and I think everyone needs to see it in a larger sample size. And one guy that I think is going to be itching to get up here is Alexei Kolosov. He's with the Phantoms, and perhaps we've seen that he hasn't had a ton of patience in terms of where he thinks he should be playing. And he's going to be competing down there, and I believe wanting to be up here. So there's that element too. Whereas if Fedotov struggles a little bit, and then Kolosov's down in Lehigh Valley stringing together good starts, there's going to be a lot of discussion about goaltending and who should be the Flyers' backup.
Yeah, I was figuring that as well, and I'm not sure the Flyers are good are really excited about the potential of that prospect, like knowing that this guy wants to come up, and if he's not the guy, and does he? Because it was a bumpy ride with Kolosov this offseason, so that's one of those things too. And one thing I wanted to point out, if you think back teams that went deep in the playoffs, many of them were using 2 goaltenders in playoff series. It's a different NHL, and you need to have a backup that you can seamlessly put into the lineup. And right now, there's nothing seamless about the Flyers' goaltending situation. Heading into last season, I would say there was, for sure. But it's a completely different picture now. And it is not the days of, Martin Brodeur making 75 to 80 starts in a season. It's just a different era, and multiple goaltenders in and out for the good teams around the league. So this is a situation that needs to be figured out by the Flyers. And like you said, who knows? Maybe we do see Kolosov up this season, because you can bet, based on their track record, if there's an opportunity open, his agent and the player are going to be pushing to get up. But the problem is with Kolosov is, with him being so young, you don't want him to come up and sit behind Ersson and not play, or play once a week. You want him to play games with the Phantoms, and a lot of them. And he can't do that by sitting on the bench with a hat on as the backup, aside from maybe one game a week. So there's that whole process to navigate as well.
And Samuel Ersson has such a good head on his shoulders. I think that's why people have confidence that he can do this. He can be a number one in Philadelphia and give them a chance to win. I think he's going to respond when he has a bad loss. I think he's going to respond well. But we saw what Tortorella did towards the end of last season. He just did not have faith in the Flyers' backup situation whatsoever. So he put a lot on the shoulders of Ersson, and he wore down. So what goalie, and can it be Ivan Fedotov, the guy that gives reason for faith, for John Tortorella to have faith, for Kim Dillabaugh to have faith in these guys, that they can spell Ersson from time to time, give them quality starts, give them a chance to win when he's not in net. I think that will be a storyline probably all season, in a season that I think has a ton of storylines, Joe.
Right, and it starts with a back-to-back.
Yep.
Which makes things very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then a week and a half later, there's another back-to-back with a home-and-home against Washington. So right out of the gates, you're going to get a clear picture of this goaltending situation and how John Tortorella feels about the goaltending situation, because within the first week and a half, you have 2 back-to-backs. So that's where you learn the most about your goaltending situation. So that's I wouldn't be totally surprised to see Ersson play both of the games, Vancouver and Calgary, to start the season, because it's the start of the season. So, but that said, you never know. It depends on what kind of game that Vancouver game is. Excuse me. If he faces a ton of shots, if it's a busy night, does he give Fedotov a look in the second game? You never know. So, but yeah, you'll certainly find out pretty quickly what the goaltending situation looks like, based on the schedule.
I have a feeling goaltending will come up on Flyers Pregame Live, produced by our very own Joe Fordyce. Pregame Live at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time Friday on NBC Sports Philadelphia. Joe, you guys have a special interview as well that you'll be showing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we a week or so ago, we went down to excuse me, the art museum with Matvei Michkov, Ivan Fedotov, Igor Zamola. Ashlyn Sullivan interviewed Michkov through Zamola and Fedotov, were kind of his translators, but also talking about the season, the 2 of their games, looking forward to the season. They did the walk up the Rocky Steps. They talked about the city, with the city in the background there, great visuals. And Michkov got a little taste for the town, and we were right there alongside. So it should be a really good way to get the season started, and that'll be on Flyers Pregame Live at 9:30 on Friday night.
Awesome stuff. Can't wait to see it. Joe, thank you so much. Great to see you. Great to chat with you. Great to finally have the games here. No more all-season podcasts. We get to talk about games. We're excited for it. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru, and Flyers fans. As always, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.